All right, as we start up today, I'm going to go over chapters 12 and 13. So if you are interested, because chapters 12 and 13 have a lot of those tables in them, if you want to, you can go out to the P drive for the class, and there is a folder with today's date on it, 3/1/2016, that you can copy to your H drive, to your desktop, to your virtual desktop, or wherever you normally copy this stuff. All right, so there it is, and it has in it some articles on different stuff that I found. I've got to get the hard copy for this too. This is more for you, Luke. There's a game that this guy put out there. It was out on Code Project. He's from another country, so I don't know what Dace Hondo, but you can play with a guy's hands. I think on one of these you can play with his hands. But it was some stuff out there, but it had some stuff on collision detection. That was the only reason I brought it out there. All right. So again, we've gone through part 1, we've gone through part 2. Part 3 is on chapters 12, 13, 14, and 15. I'm going to do chapters 12 and 13 today, 14 and 15 on Thursday. All right. In addition, I'm going to do this a little bit out of order from where I was going to do it. If you have not yet completed the first assignment, and that is many people in the class. All right, when I say completed it, I mean totally completed it. Some people in the class have not even started it. Then why don't you go out here? Go out to www.freehtml5templates.com. That's what I did. All right, and when I went out there, this is what it looks like. There literally are hundreds of templates out there. So I went through about 10 pages worth and found this one. It's not the greatest, but it's okay. You know, it's called Bubble Pool, and you can see that, you know, you got some stuff here. Looks very similar to the one I showed you last semester. But from there, I went on and did this. So this is my attempt at this. All I did was I went out online, found 2 different images on Google Images, one for Blackhawk and one for Uber. You can see I didn't even space them, which I should have done. All right, and I put a little tagline and a little stuff in here, and there's my home page. I added a few things to it, so make it a little nicer, a little BTC, a little Uber stuff, and this is real stuff. That's from BTC's page. That's from Uber's page. Then I went in and created an about page, which again is all from Uber. Even put the thing in there about that driver who killed those people. All right. And then I created a very simple, at least I think, and I realized after I did it, it's not complete, but I'll show you what I've got so far at least. This is the form. All right. ID, first name, last name, address, city, state, zip, email, phone number. I didn't put the thing in there, and I want to put that along the side where you can ask what campus you're from and whatever. All right. So I'll do that. Then I just made a copy of that. So notice the same one that we see here, and we see here. All right. So it's the same one in all 3. So what I'd like you to do for class next time is either go out and grab a template or create your own. You can do that. That's fine. Pick out a template. Don't use mine. Create an image and logo or logo for your website. All right. This again, especially if you haven't done anything yet. The lecture today will be done by 10:45. So you actually will have enough time to do most of this today. All right. But people are falling behind in every class. And sometimes it's the same people. All right. So what I'm going to do today is I am going to give you lab just in Android. And the reason for that is on Thursday, I'm going to do the BMI project with you as a class. All right. It probably won't be nearly as slick as, I've graded a few of them and they've been pretty good. All right. And we are going to go over that to-do list in the iOS class. Yes.
You want us to put the files for what's out on our class drive as well as put it on Site 5?
Yeah, if you put stuff out on Site 5, sometimes I have problems getting to it. So if you just throw the whole thing onto your H drive, that would make it much easier for me. All right. So when you're doing this, put together a real main page, or home page, I guess would have been a better wordage right there. A real home page, a real about page. Because like I said, I don't want this to be Lauren Ipsum stuff. All right? Create the required HTML form and basically have 3 copies of it. So tie these 5 pages together on the website. Come to class on Thursday. And in the first half of the class, what we're going to do is we're going to go over chapters 14 and 15, but that'll probably only take about a half an hour to 45 minutes. Then in the second half, I'm going to show you the way that you can validate those. It will be much easier for you if you've already created the forms. All right? So that's what we're going to do. And then Thursday in the Android class, we're going to build the BMI application. And Thursday in the iOS class, we're going to build the BMI application. All right. Then next week, we're going to go on and do all new stuff in the Android class and in the iOS class on Tuesday. Then on Thursday, I'm going to show you how I built the currency converter for both languages. All right? Because my goal is for everybody to be caught up by the time you go on break. I don't want it where people say, yeah, what a crummy break. All I did was frickin' homework. All right? I don't want that. All right, so again, starting with chapter 12. Okay, that's what we're going to get into right now. So, I don't have the book with me, but that's fine. This chapter is on animation more than anything else, and there are several examples. Again, if you do take the time to go in and look on the in-class folder, take a look in here under the chapter 12 stuff. Those are examples of everything that's discussed in this chapter. You may want to use that or reference that because for the next assignment, you're going to have to incorporate into your BTC Uber site material from chapter 12, chapter 13, chapter 14, and chapter 15. All right? So I'm hoping that by Thursday I can have your next assignment written up. And then next week will be lab in that class for the entire week. Then right before break, because we have 2 weeks after this week, then break. All right? So the last week, the week before break, and I don't know when the heck that is, 1st, 8th, 15th, the 14th, 15th, whatever the heck that is. That week we will go over chapters 16, 17, 18, and 19. And when you go on break, I will give you that next assignment. You don't have to do it during the break. The week after break in here for this class will be lab. All right? Then we will get into the all new stuff. We'll get into the Angular. So we'll have plenty of time to at least talk about that stuff. My hope is to spend about 3 weeks on the Angular, probably not even give you an assignment on it, but maybe do some stuff as a class, because that'll leave us with about 4 or 5 weeks left. That'll be just time for you to work on your projects. All right? And again, if you say, can I, because a couple of people have asked this, can I do the same project for this class and the Android class and the iOS class? The answer is yes, you can. But if you're let's say you're going to make a game, as an example. I don't know. If Luke's got his Luke Frogger game and he wants to make that in JavaScript, jQuery, and he wants to make it in Android, and he wants to make that in iPhone, that's okay. But having one project that you create in just one of those 3 languages is not okay. Does all that make sense? All right. So again, there's a bunch of stuff in here. It goes in and it talks about things like slide toggle. You've seen this kind of stuff before. All right. Again, there are just boatloads of examples in here. Fade toggle. All right. Where you see when something fades slowly or fades very quickly type of an idea. All right. There's also things like there are some regular animates. Animate height and width. Okay. Again, by and large, I just took the examples that were in that are online already. okay? And some of them are kind of contrived. Would you probably ever want to do something like this? You know what? You might. You might want to set it up so that when somebody comes out to your BTC Uber site, maybe that happens to maybe something like this automatically happens to your logo. I don't know. All right? But that's the kind of thing you're going to have to think about. I was talking to the class yesterday because they already heard this lecture, but the thing is that the biggest problem that you get with animation is that people overdo it. It's either they have none or they overdo it. They think they have to animate everything. And again, maybe you've seen this before. Again, I mentioned this yesterday, a lot of heads were shaking up and down. But I've been out to sites where there's really cool animation on it. I mean, really neat stuff. And I leave the site and I don't really have any idea what the content was, but they had really cool animation. That probably is overdoing it then. All right? So again, there's a bunch of other things that are in here also, hiding, showing, etc. And we've talked about a lot of them already. So you can see there's about 5 or 6 objectives: understanding animation fundamentals, creating sliding elements, creating image galleries using simple resize and transparency animations, implementing expandable and collapsible elements, delaying animations for better effects, and how to animate element movement for dynamic web pages. This is one thing you'll have to do in the next assignment, is to somehow figure out how to put some animation on your page. I am purposely, again, going to make the requirements general in nature. I don't want any two people to have the same, have their look and feel of their site be the same. All right? And I will tell you, again, in here, and I'm not going to mention names. I would never try to embarrass anybody. But in this class, out of what? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Right now, I've got 8 people out of 12 that either haven't turned in anything, or what they've turned in would be considered a failure level. In other words, it's 60% or below. That's why I'm going to work on this with you, okay, and on Thursday. All right. So animation can be very simple. As an example right here, they're talking about this. Okay, they're animating an image, all right, to a certain height and to a certain width. As they mentioned, right underneath the example that you see on the screen, you can only animate properties that have a numerical type of value. So as an example, as they say there, you can't animate a border style, but you can animate the size of the border to make it expand or collapse. All right. There are different ways that you can call an animate method, and they show you examples of some of them here. That's not a real big thing one way or the other. Now it says here, you cannot animate color changes using the color names, but you can animate them using hex values. All right. And maybe you've seen some of this stuff where you kind of morph from one color to another. All right. And again, some people like to do stuff like that. Other people find that, whatever. But I showed you some examples of that. In fact, if you remember, earlier this semester, I grabbed one of those things from HTML5 templates, and I put it out there. It's out there under someplace, under the in-class folder. But there was that thing where I went from sunrise to sunset, and it was playing as a slideshow as you bring the site up. So the main things that are associated here, that you get associated here with different kind of animations, these are some of them. All right, and again, I put in examples of this stuff also. The complete, as it says, it defines a function called when the animation is completed. It's a callback type of function. All right, and do you have to do that? Again, I am to the point where I'm not going to be putting down on assignments, from chapter 12, you have to do this, 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 and this. From chapter 13, you have to do this, this, and this. I'm not doing that. But I am going to put some terms and some stuff that's in there, and it'll say you will be expected to implement this, whatever this happens to be. All right? You probably have worked with duration if you've done any kind of work at all with animation. And typically it's fast or it's slow or it's normal. Normal is 400 milliseconds. But with virtually all this, if you want to change the time, You can also put a millisecond value in there. So if I wanted something to fade out slowly, I might give it 5,000 milliseconds so it faded out over 5 seconds. And you might look at that and say, 5 seconds, that'd be ridiculous. No. Again, especially if, gauge your audience all the time. You've heard me say this. If I'm doing a site for elderly people, you don't want to have stuff zoom in and zoom out too fast. It's just too hard sometimes for them to comprehend. Whereas if you're doing a site for little kids, they love stuff like that. So it depends on what it is you're trying to do. Now notice this easing, and I want to show you this site. I haven't bookmarked it or anything, but it's called MatthewLean.com. Okay? That's it. MatthewLean.com. You're like, what the heck are you showing us that for? Because notice what he has out here. He's got examples of all the different types of easing. So if I want to ease out or ease in with a bounce, and I want to do it basically using a fade in, and I want to do it over 3,000 milliseconds, I can click test, and you can see exactly what's happening. So he's got all of the different examples. Sometimes I think in here that people in their zeal and then in their whatever to get things done, what they do is they think, I got to do everything on my own. You'd still be doing it on your own, but you can use a site like this as a template for how you want to do things. And what better way to be able to test things than to have a site that basically is set up as a test site. All right, again, maybe you don't agree with that. That's my opinion. It's the old saying, don't reinvent the wheel. And I'm going to put him on the spot here a little bit, but I'd say with Mr. Wegman right there, my guess is that in all the consulting and other work that he's done, he hasn't sat there and said all the time, I think I'm going to start from scratch and not take advantage of anything that's out there on the net or anything I've done before. I don't think he's done that, because why would you? And why should you be? That said, I don't want you to just go copy stuff from other websites.
I did that once on some queries I had to fix. They were that bad.
Oh.
It's like, just tell me what results you want.
Yeah.
And let me rebuild it. I'm not
But
gonna-
again, that's the exception.
But the site was there.
That's the exception rather than the rule.
Site.
Okay? Yeah, and any of you who have done any work on an internship or whatever, where you go to work for somebody, you're doing a website or whatever for them. What do you want? Geez, I don't know. What they're telling you is, show me something, and then I'll tell you what I don't want. That's usually how it works. All right, but I think this is an example of something that could help you on the next assignment. All right, there's also queuing. As it says, the animation will be queued behind any others. What you'll see as we go through this is it's also possible to stop all your animation. Okay? You can step through, as it says, specifies a function executed each step in the animation until it completes. All right? Not only then is there easing, there's also special easing that you can do. When you go and you start to animate by default, it queues everything. What queue means, remember, is the first in is the first out. So in other words, if I tell it to do 5 animations, it'll do number 1, then it'll do number 2, then it'll do number 3, then it'll do number 4, then it'll do number 5. Okay, that makes sense. But it's sometimes easy, if you haven't thought about it ahead of time, to screw up animations. There are examples in this chapter and the next chapter where, for example, they've got a bunch of images that appear on the screen. They're not thumbnails, they're a little bigger than that, but maybe there's 5 or 6. As you take your mouse and you hover over them, the image looks faded, but when you hover over it, it becomes active, but only one can be active at a time. Well, maybe you've done things like that or even created things like that, but where that can get screwed up is if you take your mouse and you just keep moving it all over the place, because the system is trying to do all those animations and it may or may not be able to. All right. So as it says, you must pay attention where you trigger your animations from. All right. So there's stop propagation and stop immediate propagation that you can use if you need to. And they give an example right here. All right. It says jQuery enables you to stop the current animations currently executing. If you call it with no parameters, it pauses everything that's in the queue. So as it says right there, maybe there's something important that's happened on the site where you might have a bunch of stuff animating, but you just literally want it to stop for whatever reason. All right. So as they mentioned, that will pause everything. The star is everything. Stop and not putting in any parameters means to just pause all of it. Notice calling stop true with a clear cue option set to true stops all animations and removes everything that's been queued up. All right. Now, again, are you going to have a lot of animations in here? You probably have some. I mean, some of the stuff that's in here makes sense when you think about it. It's a site that's for a car service. You might want to have a car animating. I don't know. All right. I don't know how easy it is to go and make your own stuff. It'd be kind of cool, I suppose, if you could find the Blackhawk mascot, put him or her in a car that says BTC Uber on it and have them drive away. I don't think that's the kind of thing you're probably going to be able to do in 5 minutes. So I wouldn't expect that. But if BTC actually was going to have an Uber site, that might be something you'd want to do. You can delay animation, as they mentioned right here. You can add a delay before the animation is added to the queue. All right. And typically, again, the reason you do something like that is going to be for effect. All right. And as they say, it's even better between different effects so you can kind of digest what just happened. I've seen this on sites before where you click a button and something slides down, it immediately slides up, and it might slide down again and slide up again. Yeah, you can do that and have it do it 5 or 10 times. What have you accomplished? All right. Going along with that, and again, I have examples of all this stuff out there. Notice there's a promise method, as it says. It allows you to apply functionality after all actions are completed. All right. And again, I went out and put a bunch of different examples of that stuff out here. So notice here's a promise example. All right. You might say, oh, big deal. I say, you see what happened? Ready, started, finished. Ready, started, finished. And it'll basically just go through that all over again. All right. Is this a great example? It's an example. There are tons of them out there on the net. Again, I already mentioned the show and hide. I think everybody's pretty familiar with the show and hide. All right. Again, we talked about them back in Chapter 9. As it says, it's common practice to animate this type of functionality. You can show and you can notice what you can add to this. You can add a duration. You can add an easing type. You can add a callback function on the end. All right. And we're going to get to the point where this first assignment was worth 50 points, or 25 points, I think it was. The next one's going to be worth 50 because you may not be doing as much, believe it or not, but I'm going to have to grade you on the quality of what you did do. All right. And I don't want it where, you come in and you say, yeah, I did one animation. It's kind of cool. I did in about 10 minutes. Well, what'd you do the other part of class? Not much. All right. So they've got examples in the book here too. In this example, this first one, if you click on the Statue of Liberty, what happens is it collapses. All right. So it fades, it gets smaller, and then it eventually just disappears. All right. If you don't like stuff hiding and fading, or hiding and showing rather, where it immediately is gone or it immediately comes back, as mentioned, you can do fade in, you can do fade out, you can do fade toggle, and you can do fade to. You'll notice that with all of these, again, duration, easing, and callback. All right. A lot of people think that if you're going to use a lot of animation, that your easing, for example, should be very similar along the whole site. So if you use a bouncing type of thing, you should use bouncing all over the place. All right. So this is the example that I mentioned in here. You take your mouse and you notice they all kind of have a faded out look, but once you put it over one of the images, that one fades in, for lack of better words. Sliding up and sliding down is another one. All right, kind of the window shade type of effect. And again, you'll notice, again, duration, easing, callback. Duration, easing callback, duration, easing callback. Sounds like a broken record because they're all set up to work the same way. If you use slide toggle, there really probably isn't a reason to do a slide up and a slide down because that's what slide toggle does. If you do a fade toggle, there really isn't a reason to do a fade in or a fade out because that's what the fade toggle does. All right. As they mention here then on the bottom of near the bottom of this page, as it says, you can also use height and width properties to create a sliding element. All right. The thing is, when you work with height and width, what happens is it maintains its ratio, its size ratio when you're animating on height and width. So it can look a lot more realistic when you work with that. There's another example. What this does, if you take your mouse and you hover over any of these links here that say image, the thing comes into view, and I think it's got a bounce easing on it, I believe. But again, you'll notice not much code really to do that stuff. Take advantage of what's in the book. So if you're working on this stuff and you have questions, look at what's in the book. All right. All right, we already talked about that. It says another dynamic that's good to animate is the repositioning of elements, specifically moving an element from one location to another. It says users hate it when they do something and page elements are all of a sudden in a different location. That may or may not be true. But again, if you animate it and you have something move across the page, it's typically easier for them to follow. This last example has spaceships and stuff shooting on the screen. I don't know exactly why they even put that in there. So that's chapter 12. Let's jump right into chapter 13. Like I said, we'll be done sometime around 10:45. So chapter 13, all on forms. All right? Again, what you're going to see, what I'm going to show you next time, I'm literally going to write the code before your eyes. And I'm going to show you how to validate HTML5, how to validate with JavaScript, and how to validate with jQuery. All right, all of them will be done. So some of that stuff is actually in here. So again, if we look at the stuff for chapter 13, all right, that's just some file stuff, kind of boring. I don't remember what that was. The stuff that's in here, this is all different stuff that's set up through the jQuery validation. For instance, if I say something has to be numeric, required a decimal number, notice as soon as I put an A in there and try to validate, it's not a valid number. All right, but as soon as I put a 1 in there, now it is valid. But if I do, they want only numbers here, so if I put in a negative, it's considered invalid. But I can put in as big a number as I want, it's totally valid. There are a bunch of examples like that in this particular chapter. So how to get and set form element values, how to dynamically build form elements, how to use form element animations to help the user navigate the form, how to automatically focus elements for users, how to create a basic e-commerce web form, and simple methods of validating web forms. Towards the end of the chapter, they've got a really good form that they create in here. We'll take a look at that in just a minute. And they're trying to sell you on this here. So why would your user want a form? You know, why would you want to basically set it up for them? Well, the easier you make it for somebody to fill something out, the better the chance they'll fill it out. All right? The better you express yourself as far as what you're looking for, the better the chance is that they'll fill it out correctly. All right? So you notice that jQuery and JavaScript have a lot of functionality for web forms. If we do nothing else, what I'd like to do is after we get done with the Angular stuff, go back and add Angular, make another form, and have that be validated using AngularJS. All right. All right. By now, ideally at least, everything that's shown right here, you know how to use. You know why you use an ID. Again, typically we're going to be using IDs on our forms so we can use the get element by ID. You learned last semester in the PHP class, we use the name attribute for a lot of the stuff that we work with in forms. All right? The type, as it says, for the type of input element, the value for the value stored for an element, and checked. And again, you may have heard this from me or someone else. Before the days of HTML5, if you wanted to show something was checked, you had to say checked equal checked. Now you only have to say the word checked. All right. When you work with jQuery, as they mention here, it says there's 3 ways to get properties and attributes of form objects. The .attr for attribute method, the .prop for properties method, and the .val for values method. All right. And as it says, the one that I tend to use the most often is the val. And they give an example here. It says jQuery provides the .val method to access values represented by the form element. All right. The example here says the following statements set the value of all input elements with type of text and then get the value of the first one. So that's setting, that's getting. How do we know that one is setting and one's getting? All right. The getting, we're putting what we're looking for on the left-hand side, or right-hand side, I should say, of an equal sign. And in the setting, there is no equal sign. We're just literally setting it. Talking here about checkbox inputs, there's different ways that you can do this. Again, depending on whether or not you're using JavaScript or jQuery, we'll look at that on Thursday. You know, all this stuff, button inputs, etc. All right. So I did put 4 examples in here, properties of the DOM file object. The name property, the path property, the size property, and the type property. All right. And in here, I actually went out to the Mozilla site to get this stuff. And they all pretty much look the same if you open up any of these examples. All right. In other words, they're going to show you the file dialog box where you can choose a file. All right. I was really amazed yesterday. I have to tell you this. I don't know if any of you, I don't think anybody in here took the 157 class last fall. And I don't know if you were the lab assistant for it or not. I don't know. With Jim.
Which one is
That's the website development class. The website development XML, CSS class. This is what the class told me. Now, you can disagree, okay? But this is what the class told me. And 5 or 6 people told me this. We talked yesterday about hidden elements. None of them knew what that was. I was just floored that they would never have been described, explained what a hidden element was. And they all said, I have no idea what that is. First of all, it told me that no one had read the chapter. All right. And second, it was like, wow, if that really wasn't explained, that's not good. But again, why would you use hidden elements? Good example, if I have an e-commerce site that sells maybe worldwide, I might take things like tax rates or something like that, and they don't have to be shown to the user. All right. Yet, if you've got, you all know this, or hopefully you do, if you've got a hidden element, still if you go in and you view the page source, hidden elements are still shown in there. All right. All right. Serializing form data. We talked about serializing and deserializing with Java in the past. You may or may not remember it. But we're talking about combining things together or breaking things apart. And I gave you the example that let's say that I had a house and I decided I wanted to move it someplace. Literally move it. But in order to move it, I had to take it apart brick by brick. And then I had to reassemble it brick by brick. That's deserializing and serializing. All right? So they talk about different input types in here. Again, everyone in here should be familiar with these. But they talk, for example, it says converting a form into a query string. So in the example, what they're doing here is in this example, they're saying you got a simple form. That simple form has got what? A text box in it. It's got a very simple select list in it and a couple radio buttons. And then what they're doing is they're serializing. So what does that mean? Well, that means they're taking these 1, 2, 3, 4 different inputs and combining them into the equivalent of one input. All right? Why would you want to do that? Maybe you'd want to be passing that to a PHP program. All right? Passing it in as elements or whatever. Notice converting a form into a JavaScript object. It says another very useful serialization techniques is to convert form data into a JavaScript object. The reason you typically want to do things like that is there might be some JavaScript methods that are built in that you can use on that object. So what they have you do here is create this form. This is a neat example. Because here's the form. And then there's a serialize button. And they serialize it both into a query string and into an array. And for the array, they're printing out each element individually. All right? When you take a look at what's here. And again, you say, well, why would I? That's fine. Why would you ever do that? Because there might be something that if I can take all that form data and transpose it into an array, there might be an array element or an array method I can use on the entire array then. All right. Next, they talk about intelligent flow control. And what they're talking about is the ability of a user to navigate his or her way through a website with little to no effort. So the easier you make it for someone, okay? I noticed, for example, and a lot of you who turned this in did this, and there was nothing wrong with it, okay? What some people did, for example, on their form was, let's say you put nothing in there, and that's how I tested it first. I put nothing in there. What some people did was they immediately had a message come under every field saying this field's mandatory, etc. Every single one, which is okay. But what a few people did was they took the first field that was required, they put a message there, they put the focus in that field, and they turned that field red. Okay? Isn't that much easier to tell what's going on? As opposed to giving them 6 or 7 messages, just give them one message, put the mouse in the field where the problem exists so they can fix it. That's intelligent form flow control. All right? Focus and blur, my hope is that by now everybody understands what those are. Again, when you click on a form element, that element receives the focus. When you click off of it and click onto another one, the element that previously had the focus now is blurred, and the new one gets the focus. Intelligently hiding and showing elements. I mentioned this to the class yesterday. It says another great trick is to dynamically hide and show elements. Back in the day, like when I was learning this stuff, I was always told, don't ever make anything invisible. Because when you make it invisible and it becomes visible again, you're playing head games with your users. But today with animation, where you can make stuff gradually appear or gradually disappear, it's much easier on the psyche, so to speak. You can disable things. That's in the past what I've always done. I know Mike Rates was talking yesterday. We were talking about the currency converter program for Android. And what he wanted to do was he wanted to create a table, but what he wanted to do was in the same cell, he wanted to have both a radio button that would have the name of the currency and a picture of that currency or a picture of their flag or whatever. And I said, well, why don't you just put them in different? I don't want to do that. I want to put them in the same column. Okay, fine. I said, well, let's instead of doing that, instead of doing it that way, what if you used an image button? Which would kind of combine both of them, wouldn't it? You could have an image button, so it would have a button, so you could select it, and you could put the picture of the currency or the picture of the flag right on the button. He liked that idea. And then he said, but I don't want them to be able to click 2 buttons at once. I said, I don't know how you click 2 buttons at once. Personally, I really don't. But I said, if that bothers you, as soon as they click a button and make a choice, just disable the other buttons. All right? A lot of times people don't do that. Maybe you've seen this before. Sometimes what websites will do is when somebody clicks a submit button, they'll take that submit button and they will disable it. You know why? Because if they don't get an answer back real fast, they'll hit submit again.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll hit submit many, many, many times. And that's ridiculous. And that's one easy way of getting around that is to just disable it. That's how you disable. And that's how you enable. All right. Controlling submit and reset. Again, look at this example. Now, in the example here, if you click the submit button, it comes back with an alert that says, sorry, not yet implemented, prevent default. Well, what's the default? The default, you know this already, with a form is to look and see whatever you had the action set to. You know, for example, what you were supposed to do here is you were supposed to bring up that PHP file. All right. Well, maybe if the form validation isn't successful, you don't want that to happen. So you could say in here under the submit, this could be a call that would do a client-side check on the form. And if that client-side check failed, if one or more of those failed, you could do this, which would say, don't allow the default to happen. Stay on the page that you're on. And they show some examples of this. This I thought was a pretty decent example, and so was the last one in the chapter. You probably have seen this kind of thing before where you have to fill out your name, your address, your city, state, and zip. And then there's typically a button here that says same as shipping. All right. And if you click it, then you don't have to enter the information in twice. Makes sense. But there are a lot of companies that ship one place and bill another place. They'd have to fill in both. All right. Notice what they also have in here. Credit cards. And they've got card numbers. And that 3-digit thing that's on the back of your card, expiration dates. They've even come in here and add a little bit of work where they've rounded some buttons. This is all stuff. Feel free to use this stuff on the sites that you're working on. Mine are very vanilla looking. They're very generic. I just, and you can say, well, I don't have the time to do it either. I get that. Do what you can do. Notice again how they've done it. They create an array with the months. They create another array here with the states in it. And that's how they build. That's a lot cleaner than the way that I did it. Does that make sense what they're doing right here? Rather than just literally having an option with 50 selects in it, which is what most of us do, it's much, much simpler. Literally, you could have taken this. It would have been hard to read, but literally you could have taken that and put it on one line. All right? Always be thinking of things like that because in the end, it's going to make it easier for you and it's going to make it easier for whomever else might end up maintaining what you've started. All right? And this was, I believe, maybe it's the second last one. Another example in here. As it says with this example, it says you already have the tools necessary to add whatever GUI interactions to your web forms you want. The purpose of this section is to give you an idea of some of the things that you can do. It's a basic registration form, but they added a bunch of stuff in it for effect. All right? And again, some of the examples are in the stuff that's in here is kind of silly. That isn't what's important. All right. Then they talk about validating a form. This is what we're going to get into. Manually validating a form. That's basically doing it either through the HTML5 or doing it usually through JavaScript. Again, we'll go over that in the next class. All right. You can also use the jQuery plugin, which I asked you to do. All right. These are some of the things that you get with the jQuery plugin. All right. And there's about 17 or 18 of these. This is the table that's near the end of the chapter. And I've got examples of each one of those. All right? Remember, when you do that, you can add your own validation messages. Okay? Finally, what this does when you work with a validate method, it returns a validator object. What does that mean? That means the stuff in here is programmatic. Returns true if the element is valid, false otherwise. Returns true if all form elements are valid, false otherwise. Returns the number of invalid elements on your form. Allows you to reset the values on your form. allows you to show specified error messages on your form. And then they even talk about, making them red and bolded and all that other stuff. And they talk about placement. And they mention that it's much cleaner to use your placement for your error and put it here and make it red as opposed to putting it here. All right, people are just used to looking at and doing different, things in a certain way. Yeah, I've never traveled abroad, but I'd always when I see it on TV and stuff, it's funny when you can see somebody who is American get into a car in like England with the steering wheel and the stuff on the other side and driving on the other side of the street because you're used to doing it a certain way. I think personally this is much cleaner than this is. So the last example that they have in here is, I think, maybe one of the better ones in the book. All right? Because they show you a bunch of this stuff. So this is all stuff that you can look at and use, all right, when you're creating your form. And you notice they've come in here and they've basically validated it using the jQuery plugin. All right? I mean, I do look at this stuff. I read through it when I try to give you an assignment and I say, okay, do they have resources they can use for it? Yes, they're right here. All right, and that's it. So again, what we will end up doing on Thursday is we'll go over Chapter 14, creating advanced page elements, not that long a chapter. Chapter 15, which is fairly long, and that's on AJAX, asynchronous JavaScript and XML. All right, questions on what you should be doing? Again, last time, please go out here or create your own if you want to. Pick out a template, create an image logo for the site, make a home page, make an about page, make 3 copies of a form. Tie those together. If you've got that done by Thursday, then I'm going to show you, if you don't know it already, when you come into class for the second half on Thursday, how to go in and do the HTML5 validation, the JavaScript validation, and the jQuery validation. I'm going to show you a way of doing it. So if Luke says, I didn't do it that way and I think I did my way better, then maybe you did. It's okay. I'm going to show you a way of doing each one. All right? So that's it for this class.